Thank you. Good to see you again, but this time I get a whole hour with you, which I'm looking forward to. And I want to start that off by being political, but not partisan, just to be clear. This is a part of a printout of the operating system for the United States of America. Other countries have similar printouts, but this one is ours. This is part of the U.S. Federal Code of Regulations. The U.S. Code of Federal Regulations is about 20,000 pages long. And if converted into book form, that's about 60 linear feet of shelf space. So this is clearly not 60 feet. Now, if we wanted to add on to that, to describe more of said operating system for the country, we might add the tax code. Now, some people will tell you that that's 70,000 pages. That's actually not true. The tax code itself is about 4,000 pages. The 70,000 refers to a whole corpus of information that sort of has become associated around the tax code. But once you add the pieces like that and other bits and pieces, I'm going to come up with an estimate of about 150,000 pages. And of course, the United States of America being a bunch of states, each state has its own set of laws and perhaps tax codes and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to make a wild guess that might add another 50,000 pages. So in total, given for a given locality, roughly the operating system for the society in which you are operating, about 200,000 pages. We're just going to use that as a very rough guess. So 200,000 pages comes out to about 80 feet of source code for that operating system that underlies the society in which you live. So at 400 feet per million pages, we get about 80 feet, as I say, of source code for that operating system. So I actually looked it up. 1 million pages of standard weight paper is 416 feet, 9 inches high. I'm going with 400 feet because when it comes to math, I am lazy. Windows 10, the source code for Windows 10 has been estimated by Microsoft to be about 40 million lines of code. So if we assume 60 lines per page and make the assumption that no line of code ever wraps to another line when printed, that gets you a stack of paper about 267 feet high. Now, that's just the operating system. I am not counting anything like, say, Office or any other application you might choose to run on it. Just that one operating system is 3.5 times larger than the operating code for the society under which you live out your days. This stack, in fact, is about 60 feet shorter than the Daniels and Fisher Tower here in downtown Denver. Google has estimated the sum total of all of the products that it offers online to be about 2 billion lines of code, which works out to about 2.5 miles tall, or 4 kilometers, for those of you visiting us from our other countries. And this, of course, is way too wide. Less unrealistic would be like this, although even that's too thick. We think of the legal code as this huge thing that has accreted over the centuries to become a massive and unwieldy leviathan of unimaginable complexity. And yet, all of those laws that I talked about at the opening are less than 2/3 of 1% of the length of Google entire. And that's just Google. We're creating and we're working on systems that are unimaginably complex and unleashing them on our users. And in the realm of law, we might expect, whether we get it or not, that laws will be fair-minded, or as fair-minded as possible. And when they aren't, we might expect to see changes, perhaps sometimes under protest, but still the changes will happen. Now, I'm not trying to say that there's a direct one-to-one correspondence between laws and code that we write, although I think it would be interesting to try to bring some of those things closer together. I would be fascinated to see what unit testing looks like for proposed legislation. But even without those sorts of code approaches, there's a back and forth in legal code between political parties, between government and citizens, ideally debate, feedback, a system of checks and balances. We don't really have that, do we? All of our debates are internal. Usually they're internal to our company or organization that we work for, or internal to our team. Like the rest of the organization doesn't even know what we're doing. Never mind the public that we hope to present this product to, right? And we often design to what seems easiest, or what seems like a good idea at the time, instead of through some sort of open process. And what we do can have incredibly wide-ranging effects. Some of you may remember this from February of this year, when Amazon Web Services just broke, right? There was this huge outage. Probably billions of people were affected by this because, if I understood the post-incident analysis correctly, one person pushed a code change that took down Amazon Web Services. Where's the responsibility there? If we're going to take credit for all the good things that we bring into the world, don't we also bear responsibility for some of the less good things we bring into the world? I mean, this outage took down uncounted websites and services all over the world. Oops, I skipped too far, sorry. I mean, how many users desperately needed to get to something that wasn't there? These are comments from TechCrunch from that same article. Kindle books won't download, just FYI. So if you've gone all digital for your reading because it's a lot easier to carry 1,000 books in your phone than it is to carry a wagon with 1,000 books behind you all the time, now you don't have it because Amazon Web Services is out. There's a guy who says that he just lost $2,100 in commissions because this happened on the last business day of the month. A couple of students saying they couldn't do their homework or study for an exam. Does Amazon owe Edwin there $2,100? I mean, they took down the service that he relied on. And the question is, as I say, this is TechCrunch comments. These people know what the problem is. How many more people were there in the world who just blamed the product or service that they were trying to use because they didn't realize that the fault was with Amazon? Kind of the same way that a lot of times when we can't reach a site, we wonder how come the site is down, and it never occurs even to us to check and see if maybe it's a DNS problem. And this is not simply a question of infrastructure. This is a question of product design. Facebook has On This Day, which shows you memories from the same date in previous years, kind of like Time Hop if you've used that, except in this case it's just about Facebook. So the design here is pretty neutral. They had some problems with this in the past. They learned to make their design elements more neutral rather than festive. And they even have preferences that let you filter out people or dates. So if you don't want to see memories from a given that involve a certain person who is on Facebook, or that come from certain dates, you can filter those out. But these preferences are really buried. Like, I only know where they were because A, I went searching for them, and B, I know people at Facebook that I could ask. Most people are not so fortunate in that sense, right? And by the way, if you want to completely disable On This Day, here's the trick. You go to Dates, and for a start date, you pick January 1st, 1900. And for an end date, you pick December 31st, 2099. Now, filter out every date between those 2 points. You cannot go beyond December 31st, 2099. It tells you that that is not a valid date. I don't know what Facebook knows that we don't. But we have till 2099 to worry about it. And you can't even really turn these off except by leaving Facebook completely when you get right down to it. Unless you literally want to select every single person in your entire friends list and every single date. And these kinds of things happen because we tend to think of our users as an undifferentiated mass. Although, shout out to my guy with the binoculars. But But we think of them as being all like people that we know, or people that we work with, or people like us, which is completely normal, but it's wrong. They're not all like the people we work with or like us. And we can acknowledge this intellectually, right? You can sit there and nod and say, yes, that's true. Of course it's true. But to actually internalize it is much harder. As I say, this is a completely human thing, right? Our brains are lazy. They take shortcuts. Right? They conserve energy as much as possible, and like real analytical, deep thinking takes energy. So our unconscious assumptions that come from the sort of, shortcut, energy-conserving habits that our brains have, these unconscious assumptions, tend to bite us. The world, of course, is riotously diverse and unexpected. So we owe it to our users and really to ourselves to be cognizant of our limitations and to push past those limitations as much as we can. As I say, this is not easy. It's going to consume energy, and we will probably want rewards. Rewards like donuts. Donuts. I was so happy when we had donuts out. But I'd like to point something out. To people with celiac disease or other gluten intolerances, this is the opposite of a reward, right? For people in those situations, wheat-based food has associations of pain and discomfort, of medical threat, in a sense. And for people who develop these sorts of intolerances later in life, this could represent pain, discomfort, and frustration and longing because this thing that they used to enjoy is no longer available to them. You can have the same sorts of problems with diabetics, for whom sugar intake has to be very carefully regulated. And this can be a danger. For me, there's a different dynamic at work. This, to me, is not a symbol of reward. This picture evokes actual feelings of disgust and the memory of nausea because I cannot stand the taste of chocolate, any form of chocolate. Now, before you go tweeting that, which you may do, that's fine, but before you do, I would like you to just sit with this for a moment and think about not what that's like, but the fact that it exists. I'm not asking you to understand what it's like to hate the taste of chocolate, right? That's not going to work any better than if I tried to understand what it's like to love the taste of chocolate. But I want you to just try to truly understand that there are people like me in the world. There are people who have the reaction to chocolate that you have when you taste or smell, let's say, liver and onions, or Brussels sprouts, or kale, or whatever it is that just makes you want to spit it out immediately, even if there are other people around. Remember, this is not a problem to be fixed. This is not something where, some of us are wrong and some of us are right. This is just an example of how more variable the world is than we tend to realize. Anyone out there share this with me and willing to admit it? I'll put my hand. See, we've got hands up. Awesome. Go you. When I did a version of this talk in Seattle, nobody raised their hand except like way off to one side. One person went, but I saw them. I saw them. Anyway, this disgust towards chocolate has actually been present my entire life. When I was 6 months old and the pediatrician cleared me for solid foods, my mother gave me my first taste of chocolate, which she'd been waiting for, and I spit it in her face. She could not understand how I could be her son and not love chocolate. Sorry, Mom. But speaking of mothers, here's another example where design sometimes clashes with reality. Right? Mother's Day, which I took a screenshot from Facebook, but they're far from the only website that has little Mother's Day stuff that comes up. Right? For many of us, for a variety of reasons, Mother's Day is difficult. Not everyone's mother is still alive. Not everyone's mother was loving or kind. Right? Some people don't speak to their mothers. But Facebook is putting this into people's feeds without checking to see if maybe that would be a good idea. And again, I'm not trying to bag on Facebook, at least not yet, because lots of sites and services do this. Facebook has all this information available to it, like if your mother is on Facebook and you are on Facebook and the two of you have connected and said, this is my mother and this is my child, then Facebook knows that you have a mother and there's a connection there. right? And so they might show this banner. They might do some historical mining to see if maybe you and your mother have friended and unfriended each other a few times, and then maybe think about not showing this. If there's no indication of, having a connection to a mother on Facebook, maybe don't show this, because Facebook in that situation doesn't know what the deal is. Maybe that person has a completely great relationship with a mother, or maybe they don't. Maybe they're like a friend of mine who has literally never known her mother. She was raised by a single father and has not even met or seen her mother in her entire life. Some of you may remember this from a few years ago when Facebook showed this in my timeline, this picture of my daughter who had died that year. They did it to me again this year. I am part of a very small group of people, perhaps a very, very small group of people, who have been apologized to by Facebook twice. And they've told me things like, we don't know how we backslid, and we're looking for that, we're looking into that. Well, I don't know either. But I think people's unconscious biases, the designers at Facebook had their unconscious biases come back to bite them again. Right? They learned the lesson in 2014, and you could see that in year in review in 2015 and 2016. But in 2017, they forgot the lesson that they'd learned. I don't know if they're going to do any better in the future, but that's just an example of how these things backslide. And we can come up with workarounds. This is Sarah Parmenter, who you all saw a couple days ago speak. She tweeted this earlier this year, where because her mother died a few years ago, she obviously wants to filter out all the Mother's Day spam. But how many users know to do this, right? We might figure out that, we can set up Gmail filters. We can notice the very subtle caret in Facebook dialogues that you click on, and then it tells you things like, it lets you do things like say, I don't want to see this again. But how many know to do that? These are unknown to most users, right? And sometimes there's no workaround. Like, this is texts, right? Where someone, I have to assume, because this is all that I have, but from the context, I'm assuming that Jeannie has a bank where she can text a string to the number that says, balance, and it comes back with a balance. But this time it came back with Happy Mother's Day. Reply mom for a fun fact about moms, right? And her reply, which I read this as, please stop. That's what I see there in that green bubble. And there was nothing that Janie could do about that except not check her balance that day, and how would she know? See, the irony here is that we cannot pretend that the universe revolves around us as designers, even as the people we're designing for assume that the digital universe revolves around them, because it does. That's how that works. And we don't just get to ignore that or decry the unfairness of it, right? We design for millions, or if we're lucky, billions of people, but every single one of those interactions is personal. So the person on the other end of that interaction, that is a one-on-one connection as far as they're concerned. We're partly responsible for this, right? We personalize as much as we can, typically speaking, right? The first name and the chummy tone and all that sort of thing, but nothing is certain. There's no safe average, right? Everyone's an exception of some kind. Your users, whoever they are, whoever's going to come into contact with the thing that you make, are both an overlapping mass of averages and a collection of completely unique facets. And there's a tendency to say here, dude, we are designing for mass communication, right? It's like you're asking us to have every person get their own radio ad. But no, that's not the medium we work in. We don't work in a one-to-many, we work in a one-to-one-to-many, as it were, or a one-to-many/one. It's like I say, those connections are personal, they're close to us. And that, that's how this works. But there's a bigger problem here, I think, which is that I think human psychology is honestly not well matched to what it is that we have done in the last decade or so. And when I say we, I mean we as a society, not we as the people in this room. Right? There's a disconnect here because we use the internet, we interact with digital products lying naked in bed or sitting on the toilet, right? Some of the most personal, unguarded moments of our lives, we haul out this slab of glass and open up a glowing fire hose of information to spray into our faces. Psychologically, I mean, that's a stupid thing to do. What are we thinking? But we all do it. I'm not even going to ask people to raise hands, right? We all do this stuff. So it's incumbent on us to be extra careful in what we do and how we do it, because when we shape information, we alter the shape of lives, sometimes in very trivial ways, and sometimes in very profound ways. And this is really, really hard to deal with. It's a lot harder than I think we thought the job was going to be when we signed up to do it, but this is part of our job now. We don't get to duck that. It is long past time we started taking this responsibility seriously. Keith Grant posted this earlier this year, and CSS. I found it interesting. And Keith's point here is that CSS isn't simple or easy, which is absolutely true, mostly for the reasons he articulates. But the kind of design that I'm talking about and that we do is much, much harder than this. I can take Keith's formulation here and add at least 2 layers of unknowns to it, each with a much wider scope than the ones he was talking about. This is really hard. I mean, and these are just the known unknowns, as I say, right? So, what are we going to do? Well, we can try harder. I cannot promise that you'll get it right every time. This is not a talk where at the end of it I say, and now I have solved all your problems. This is as much about questions as it is about answers. But just trying will buy you a lot of goodwill with your users. Right? And that way, if you stumble, they're a lot more likely to forgive you because you will have that history of having tried to do right. What I can give you today is a few ways of thinking about and about stress testing your work, because stress testing makes your work stronger. I don't know how many of you are familiar with civil engineering, but when a new bridge is going to be built, they make a model of the bridge, and then they put a scale amount of weight on it equal to the amount of traffic, load that they think that will bear, and then they keep going until they find out what is the breaking point of this particular structure. That's how they build safe bridges. And I don't know about you, but if I'm going to drive across a bridge, I would like it to be one that some engineers said, you know what, even if Morton Thiokol is shipping some solid rocket boosters across this bridge and then they have to stop in a traffic jam, it's still not going to fall down. That would be great. Now, here's a situation that I think reflects this fairly well. So here's a situation where Julianne Hadfield posted that she got from whatever service that this content management or the content filtering system had found that her track Impossible Song might contain or be a copy of Impossible Song by Julianne Hadfield. Seems likely. Right? But look at the tone here. Right? This is copy, but copy is design, right? Content is design. And the copy here is, to some degree, respectful, right? It doesn't accuse. Just, we've detected that one of your tracks might contain copyrighted material, right? Might. That's actually really crucial in this situation. Instead of one of your tracks contains copyright material, right? As a result, your track has been removed from your profile for the time being. Please look, get in touch if you believe there's been a mistake. Which in this case, yeah. But it leaves room for them to be wrong. And in that copy, it says, hey, here's the situation. We've taken it away temporarily. We've done this thing effectively temporarily. We've done a reversible thing, right? That's for that time being. But please look and let us know if you believe there's been a mistake. Instead of, you copyright thief, we have caught you. Ha ha, your plan is foiled. Which, someone might have said, let's have fun with this copy. Let's delight the user. No. This is not a time to delight. MailChimp's voiceandtone.com, if you're not familiar with it, is a great place to look at, what to do in various situations. And one of the things that they say, if there's an error message or a compliance alert, which that's what this is not from MailChimp, to be clear, but this is a compliance alert. They say, be straightforward, don't joke around with people who are frustrated. And Juliana Hatfield probably was frustrated, right? Yes, my song contains my song, thank you. But look at her comment. When automated systems are stupid, not, and I don't know that this came from YouTube, but let's just assume for a moment, when YouTube is, awful, or I hate YouTube so much, or, and again, I don't know that it was YouTube, but you get the idea. Right? She's kind of rolling her eyes about this, right? Because of all of that work that went into, hey, we could be wrong here. Here's the situation. Let us know if we can fix it. Not nearly as angry as she could have been. So, one method I talked about last year was about looking through the eyes of someone in crisis. And to be clear, Juliana Hatfield was probably not in crisis at that moment. She's got enough other things going on that she could deal with this. But imagine an artist who's just starting out and trying to get their stuff out there in the world, and this automated system, suddenly pulls their music down right after they just, paid to advertise the song in a whole bunch of different places. That could really feel like a crisis. So I talked about it last year, this designing through the eyes of someone in crisis in a hospital context. And what a lot of people would say to me after the talk was, dude, I dig it. I dig what you're saying. I don't work in healthcare. I don't have life or death situations going on, right? And to some degree, what they meant was, nobody who's in crisis will be using my thing, right? And I remember one in particular who did web consulting for an animal shelter. Not this one. This is the local animal shelter in my hometown where we got our cat, or the first of our cats. But anyway, this person who did this work said that they had the site for this animal shelter, and the whole founding mission statement of the animal shelter was to help people give up animals for adoption so they didn't get abandoned, left at the side of the road. And that they had this online form for giving up an animal for adoption that was 75 steps over multiple pages, where they collected all the information about the pet and about the person who was giving up the pet and all that sort of thing. And I said, wow, that seems really complex. And they said, right, and nobody in crisis is going to be using this form. We like to get all the information ahead of time because A, it means that we have all the information by the time they bring the animal in, and also B, it's sort of a hurdle so that somebody, when they're just frustrated, doesn't suddenly decide, I'm giving up my dog, that's the last time they chew on my slippers, right? They have to go through this process to deal with this. And I said, yeah, let's think about that. What about a situation where someone's elderly parents have to, have had a situation where they have to move into assisted housing very quickly? Or, worse, if their elderly parents have died. But they have to fly in from out of state. They've got a week, that's it, to deal with all the paperwork that goes with, maybe they have to pick a facility, and once they've searched, as long as they can to find the best facility, then they have to go through the application process for that facility. They've got to figure out what they're going to do with all the possessions, and there are these 3 cats, or this, 2 dogs, which cannot go to the assisted living facility because it does not accept pets. Right? They probably want to do the right thing and give up the animal for adoption, but it's probably not at the top of their priority list at that moment. They only have so much time, right? And if they go to this animal shelter's website and they discover that there's this multi-page process to register to give up for adoption, that's probably not going to get finished. And by making it, basically the form was making it more likely that in those sorts of situations, animals would end up abandoned on the street, which is exactly what the organization was designed to prevent. Right? So that's an example of someone who's in a sort of a crisis, a personal crisis situation. I also heard a fair amount from people who work for educational institutions. This is the one that I graduated from and worked for a while. And this is their student page, right? And a personal crisis can be like, my roommate just tried to commit suicide, which happened to me when I was a freshman. But it could also be, graduation is in 10 days, classes are over, professors have already started to go on vacation or sabbatical, my entire family is flying in to see me graduate, and I just discovered that one of my professors did not input a grade for my course, and I am 2 credits short of the graduation requirement. Now what? Right? What do I do now? Because, perhaps nobody's life is at risk, although I don't know, in some families maybe that would be a life-risking situation, but that's a huge problem, right? Maybe that professor is no longer available, right? Like, will the university let me walk, so that all of my relatives who came from all over can see me do the cap and gown? Like, what do we do here, right? That's a personal crisis. And I did a little bit of looking at this page. I didn't find anything, right off the bat. I took this screenshot a while ago, so they may have changed since, so don't get me wrong. But developers, we do not get a pass on this either. I'm going to include myself among your number. The kind of design I'm talking about extends well beyond the visual. Right? There's a really good example of this in WordPress, which, runs like a quarter of the web now or something, according to their latest statistics. That's a lot of sites being run by a lot of people. And it's possible, if something goes wrong on the back end, as an administrator, to get this error message. That's it. That's a screenshot direct from my browser. For those of you in the back who might be having trouble seeing that, let me make it more legible. That's what it says. How helpful. Now, the way this gets triggered is if there's a problem with permissions when you're working in the back end, right? The admin account gets logged out somehow, maybe somebody flushes cookies, and then they're trying to hit, post-editing pages, whatever. There's a number of other ways it can happen. It's not common, but it does happen. And this is it. It's the whole page. No styling, no actual even markup the last time I checked. It was just text. I could be wrong about that, but this got filed as a bug in the WordPress bug tracker. I've seen this infamous error message more times than I wanted. Okay, so infamous. This was filed in August of 2010, by which time this error message had apparently already become infamous. This spawned 7 years of discussion about what to do with this infamous bug, right? Some people proposed alternate error messages. Other people defended it. They wanted it to stay. For 7 years. There we go. Now, in fairness, that 7 years of discussion did lead to a change. Now Cheetna is an H1, and then there's a paragraph, very short, with a vague error message that might help you understand what's going on. Now, that's an improvement, don't get me wrong, but it's still accusing people of cheating. So yet another bug was filed. This one in October of 2016, right? Cheating message insults needs changing. I want to call out a particular passage from the original bug filing here, right? Once a day I get the message, cheating are we, INI and GB. They localize this error string. Okay? That's not actually, but this, it never ceases to annoy me to be unjustly accused. Right? Unjustly accused. This is eroding goodwill. Right? Remember when I talked about how if you do things as best you can, that actually earns goodwill? This is eroding that. So there was a situation, it was a few years ago now, where there was a very minor dot release upgrade for WordPress. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like from 3.4.1 to 3.4.2, right? Like literally 100th dot release. But what happened was something in that dot release changed the way that WordPress plugins talked to the WordPress core. And people started getting cheetna, which in EN, that's not even the American English. I don't know what that is. But people started getting it because a whole bunch of plugins had relied on a certain way of doing things, and something in that incredibly minor update broke it. And there was one comment I remember in the bug tracker that said something like, I managed 500, and I remember the number specifically, that's not an exaggeration on my part, I managed 500 WordPress sites. None of them work. This is the last WordPress upgrade I ever install because I'm migrating all of this to a different CMS that doesn't break on me like this, right? And doesn't tell me I'm cheating when I'm not. Think of all the people, and you may be one of them, who had a really bad experience with an airline and swore never to fly that airline again. Was it because of that one bad experience, or was it because of all of the crappy experience that had been had before that one bad experience, and that was it? No, I am done now. As opposed to the people who have flown airlines where they've had a series of good experiences, and then maybe they have one bad flight, and they complain about it to everybody, but they don't swear off the airline, right? So people who fly JetBlue, or Virgin America, as I understand, of the two, I've only ever had a chance to fly JetBlue. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, JetBlue, I had this terrible flight, I'm never flying JetBlue again. But I've heard it about a lot of other carriers. Because of that eroded goodwill, that lack of trust that was built up between the organization and the people making use of it. So anyway, this bug from 2016 spawned its own discussion. The original poster suggested that instead of cheetna, it say something like, I'm sorry, username, I'm afraid I can't do that. Okay? Which is, actually, yeah, it's Little Hell 9000. That's the reference. But the point, their idea was that even if someone didn't know that reference, it was still, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Right? So it had those two layers, which was a pretty good proposal. There was then a discussion about whether that would be acceptable across various cultures, which was really nice to see that was being talked about. But still, there was no resolution, at least as of the last time I checked. You know, WordPress has this tagline, code is poetry, but this feels like a mean-spirited limerick directed at the user. And I feel like this is a situation that could benefit from what I call a designated dissenter. Sarah Wachter and I wrote about this in our book, Designed for Real Life, thus the title of this talk. But a designated dissenter is somebody on a project team whose job is to say, what are we assuming, and what if those assumptions are wrong? Right? So in this situation, we're back here, I can think of a few assumptions here. One is the assumption that people who see this message are somehow doing something they shouldn't be doing, which, as we've established, is not always true. Okay? Another assumption is that humor will diffuse the tension here. Right? That's a tough call, right? I mean, another related assumption is that people will share our sense of humor, right? That saying cheetna will make them laugh instead of get more angry. Now, that might work for some people. Like some people's sense of humor, that might fit completely. But trying to diffuse tension with humor is a difficult proposition, even if you know the person who's tense really well. How many of WordPress's users do you think the WordPress programming team knows really well out of the quarter of the web that it's running on? And another assumption here, actually, and that I know that that's at least one assumption, that humor is good and that, being irreverent is fun, because that was literally the way that some people defended the error message in the original bug, It's like, we don't want to be all stuffy and corporate. WordPress is scrappy and an underdog. Yeah, you're on a quarter of the web, scrappy and a crappy underdog? No, but another assumption in that is that the users give 2 feathers off an emu's tail as to whether or not we see ourselves as humorous and irreverent. I'm going to guess most of them don't. Right? Now, I want to be clear. A designated dissenter is not someone who crouches like a panther, watching every move, just waiting for this moment, right? That's not the job. So if that's what you thought that was going to do and you were just submitting a change request for your business cards, you might want to rethink that. Because here's what a designated dissenter should be doing, is saying, have we thought about this? Let's consider the design, how this might backfire in some context. How can we make that better? All right. And we write about it more in the book. I will also say that if you were thinking about making this your business title, you actually shouldn't, because there should not be one person whose job this is, unless you're the only person on the team, in which case you're nominated. But the designated dissenter should be per project, but it should be a different person on each project for a variety of reasons that we get into in the book. But there's something that I think really would have benefited from a designated dissenter, which is to say Pokemon Go. Now, Pokemon Go, for those of you who haven't played it, augmented reality, kind of game. You can do literal augmented reality stuff where you can see a Pokemon. My son has just gotten into the card game, so I haven't learned the lingo yet, but you can see like a Pokemon there that you can try to capture, or if you don't do that, you can sort of walk around on a virtual map that corresponds to where you are in the real world. There's some really cool stuff about this. I mean, it's a video game that makes people get up and walk around, which is kind of an inversion of the usual way video games work. So that's kind of cool. And there's a lot of other coolness about it as well. Some really great things can happen playing Pokemon Go. Marcy, who's been working at the registration desk here, so some of you probably interacted with her, she uses it to explore cities when she's at events or just traveling on her own. She was telling me about one event that she was doing where she was in a hotel she'd been to a bunch of times before. But she wanted to go out for a walk. It was a really nice day, so she pulled up Pokemon Go. And the thing about Pokemon Go, again, for those of you who aren't familiar, is that there are these locations called Pokestops, where you can collect virtual doodads, or, again, I'm a little late on the lingo, but you get the idea. Like, Pokestops are kind of important, and so you can walk from Pokestop to Pokestop. And the Pokestops tend to correspond with locations of some sort of significance. Right, so here in Denver, the Daniels and Fisher Tower might be one of those, but also community murals and little out-of-the-way statues that commemorate some historical event. Those kinds of things tend to be where the Pokestops are. And so Marcy, as I say, was in this city in a hotel she'd stayed in a bunch of times before. She pulls up Pokemon Go and she sees there's like a string of Pokestops near her hotel. And so she went looking for him and found this little historical trail through a park that she had never noticed before, even though she'd stayed in this hotel multiple times. Right? History. It's a pretty cool thing to stumble over. Maybe stumbling across national borders is less cool. This actually happened. National borders tend to be, monitored by humorless people with guns. Minefields, another thing not so cool to stumble over. But a non-governmental organization last year had to basically put up flyers and send out a warning to people saying, hey, Pokemon Go, very cool, does not know where the minefields are. Which sounds funny in a way, but it's not. So eventually, Niantic, the creators of Pokemon Go, added this to the loading screen. Now, I know if you're a Pokemon Go player, you already know this is like a way older loading screen with some really weird perspective. I don't understand what's happening with this sea serpent thing because it's in front of the bridge and yet I don't know. Anyway, but they put this thing up, right, that was not in the original loading screen, right? Remember to be alert at all times. Stay aware of your surroundings. Thanks, Niantic. When that turned out not to be enough, They added it as a pop-up as soon as you opened the game that you had to dismiss in order to start playing. And when that wasn't enough, they added a series of things like do not trespass while playing Pokemon Go, right? Do not enter dangerous areas while playing Pokemon Go. Do not play Pokemon Go while driving. Because there were documented cases of people playing Pokemon Go while driving and they slammed into other things. And we could say to ourselves, duh, users, what's wrong with you? But at the same time, how much responsibility does Niantic and its designers bear here? Right? What responsibility do they have for not thinking about things like national borders or minefields left over from war or Superfund sites? Should these have been in place at launch, perhaps? A designated dissenter might have uncovered this omission, that there was no sort of warning of, hey, we have a game that encourages you to play in the real world, which is, on occasion, dangerous. So maybe we should remind you of that fact. Maybe we should have ways for people to say, hey, Niantic, this Pokestop, you should really remove it because it's in a minefield, or that it's in a street on a beachfront that now is underwater, right? I mean, coastal erosion is a thing. So that might have been uncovered. But this kind of thinking extends beyond the visual. I mean, Alexa and Google Home are these nifty gadgets that show us what the future will be like, right? But these are products that really need to have their assumptions questioned, and that we are really going to have to question our own assumptions as we start to design experiences for them, interactive experiences. Right? I mean, think about what's being assumed when you design for voice interaction. When you have one of these things sitting around. I mean, we just got, in my family, we just got a Fire Stick not so long ago. I know, we're behind the times, but that's how it goes. And it comes with a remote that has like Alexa built in, and Alexa, you can tell Alexa things like, fast forward or pause. This is me using Alexa.
Computer. Hello, computer.
Alexa cannot hear a damn thing I say. I went through the setup tutorial. Well, I went through the first step of the setup tutorial because it was like, say this. I said it. Nothing happened. I was a Scottish elevator scene all over again. And I thought about putting the Scottish elevator scene in this talk. I'm really glad I went this route instead. But that's okay. I can still use the remote, but not everyone can. And sometimes, if you're designing this sort of experience, you may find that other people use it against you. So some of you may have seen this ad. I believe it ran during the Super Bowl.
You're watching a 15-second Burger King ad, which is unfortunately not enough time to explain all the fresh ingredients in the Whopper sandwich. But I got an idea. Okay, Google, what is the Whopper burger?
That's the ad. By some metrics, this ad was hugely successful, right? At the time that I took the screenshot here, 4 million views. I just discovered 30 minutes ago that the ad's no longer on YouTube, so sorry, the link in the resources page doesn't work anymore, but you just saw the ad, so don't worry about it. 4 million views. And they only had to pay for a 15-second ad, so they really cut down on what they had to pay for, let's say, a Super Bowl ad, but they got interaction beyond that time frame. But basically, this is Burger King weaponizing Google's work against the users of Google's products. They got a ton of press coverage, some of it like this, right? I mean, literally described in the headline as invasive. And people who had their Google Home suddenly start spouting Whopper facts at them, described it as an invasion of privacy. They legitimately felt that way, right? And Google had to add code to stop Burger King from doing that, right? Stop spouting Whopper facts at the users, please. Right? Invasive. Like, what needs to be considered in these scenarios? This is another one. Should we assume all voice inputs are valid? Alexa in this case, maybe, and Google Home need to do some sort of analysis to see if the speech they're hearing is coming from a human throat or a speaker. Because, this happened. There was some of you probably remember this, this news story where a little girl in, I think, San Diego, figured out, this young girl figured out that if she said, Alexa, buy me a dollhouse, that Alexa would buy her a dollhouse. So they ran this report, and then when the report was over, the anchor said, I thought that was so adorable when she said, Alexa, buy me a dollhouse, leading to this news story, where the anchor saying that caused a whole bunch of Alexa, Amazon Echoes to buy people dollhouses. Which Amazon then had to come out with this policy of, hey, if your Alexa bought you a thing mistakenly, we'll take it back free of charge. Okay, that's a design solution, I guess, but there are other things I should be thinking about, right? Maybe it needs to check for voice prints. Because imagine if you have one of these, either an Amazon Echo or a Google Home set up in your Airbnb, and a guest checks in and decides to say, okay, Google, what's my bank balance? Alexa, tell me my search history. And you might say to yourself, well, don't put the thing in the Airbnb, but maybe it's all wired up so that your guests can have this super cool experience where they can say, Alexa, turn off the lights, or Alexa, play the radio, or right? But now you've got this other problem. Maybe we shouldn't assume that all voice inputs are human. I really want to know what Larry Bird ordered. It's so frustrating that there's no follow-up to this. Place an order without asking permission, but what? What did you want, Larry? Oh, I wish I knew. This one actually sounds pretty cool. A guy and his girlfriend got into an argument, and he pulled out a gun, and he started shouting, "Did you call the sheriff?" So Google Home called the sheriff. They arrested him. Awesome! That is, yes! But what happens when you're watching an action movie and somebody yells, "Call the SWAT team!" When the SWAT team shows up, they sometimes enter bullets first. And I honestly think it's only a matter of time before somebody gets injured or killed in a scenario like this one. Unless Amazon and Google do a lot of work to prevent it. And I don't know if they're questioning those assumptions. I hope they are. And if there's somebody here from one of those firms, I hope you take that back. Imagine some teenager playing video, he's playing Rainbow Six, and yells, "Call the SWAT team." That would bypass almost every one of the things that I talked about, like check to see if it's a valid voice print, and check to see if it's coming from a human throat nearby instead of a speaker, right? But now what? Should our connected devices be doing this? And I honestly don't have an answer. Like I said earlier, this is not necessarily a talk of answers. It's a talk of, here are some questions we need to be asking. Now, if you'd like to know even more, Microsoft has a fantastic site. If you just search for inclusive design at Microsoft, or if you go into the links and the resources page we posted, I have a link there. But they have a site about what they're doing with inclusive design. And this actually started in trying to make Xbox Live more accessible, which is their online gaming service. And they talk, these are their 3 design principles, which, really good design principles to start from, right? Recognize exclusion, which as they say, is when we solve problems using our own biases, even if we're not aware of them. But by seeking out exclusions, like people who have been excluded from using the thing, whatever the thing is. In this case, Xbox Live. People who can't use Xbox Live. Okay, why can't they use Xbox Live? can we make it possible for them to use Xbox Live? And thereby make it easier for everyone else. Like, learn from diversity. See what people who have these limitations are already doing and see if you can learn from that. And solve for one, extend for many, which is the look at a specific like constrained situation and then have a solution that extrapolates out. So one of their examples is somebody who has lost an arm or the use of one arm. If you can make a product that works for them, you've then also made a product that works for the parent of a newborn who's carrying it around. That's a one-armed person, in effect, right? So do you have a product that requires two hands, or can they get by with one? Someone who's hard of hearing, can we make a product that works for them? Okay, now we've also made a product that can work for people in noisy environments, even if they have perfect hearing, and so on and so on. They have a manual and a set of activities. This is all completely free. You don't have to be like a member of some Microsoft developer team or whatever. This is all out there. They have these videos where they talk about their vision. You can see the gaming for everyone there. Designing Xbox experiences to empower everyone. And they really mean everyone. Like I said, solve for one, extend for many. A lot of times when we see things like empower everyone, we think, oh, that means they're building, special code or cases or whatever for people who have limitations. But they're really trying to push this to the place where it helps everyone. If they can make Xbox Live, for example, Xbox Live gaming better for somebody who uses only voice input, then they've created a voice-driven system that anyone with a voice can use. So I highly recommend that. If you want something a little more tangible, as I say, Sarah Wachter-Betcher and I wrote a book last year. It came out last year. There's a little discount code if you want to use it. If you already have the book and you want to buy it as a gift for someone, that's fine. But if not, like I say, Microsoft has their resources. There are some other sites that have just been coming out this year about inclusive design and these kinds of principles. So, check them out, because this is the world that we're faced with, like this incredibly diverse set of people. If the product that we're working on becomes sufficiently widespread, literally people all around the planet, we can't all be Facebook, I get it, right? But firms like Facebook, like Google, like Microsoft, are designing at scales that we all may have to contend with. And they're hitting these situations that no one's ever been in before. I can't think of any firm that has had to design for 2 billion monthly active users. That's about 20 to 25% of the global adult population, right? And yeah, we're probably not going to be operating at those scales, at least not for a while. But we still have collections of people that we know very little about who are coming to use our products, the work that we do. They're going to interact with what we produce in the world, and it's incumbent on us to make that as welcoming as possible. It's up to us to extend a hand to help them up rather than inadvertently put up a hand to block them. So I hope you will take that idea, the things that Derek talked about, that all the speakers have talked about, and apply that to your work. And I thank you very much for listening.